Hello, I'm John Whelan, and today with Mark Poisler, we will be expanding upon what post-colonial literature is, its importance, and some themes and authors that emphasize the literary evolution. Post-colonial literature is literally defined as literature by people from formerly colonized countries. This literature exists on all continents except Antarctica. But, to further understand post-colonial literature, we must first look at the atrocities of colonialism. Colonialism, or the practice of establishing control over another country, was especially pronounced in Africa, Asia, South America, and North America. It was dictated by racial hatred, forced labor, stealing, and an extermination of culture. What I mean by this is, for example, white colonists often labeled the people they were conquering as savages, and thus they said they were the civilized masters. In this way, the colonizers justified stealing their land, resources, and other financial assets to make a ton of money, while teaching the native peoples their own civilized language and culture. This led to some major themes in post-colonial literature that we will get to in a second. Post-colonial movements centered largely on anti-colonial liberation and the re-establishing of the native hold on their countries, the expelling of colonialism, if you would. Thus, post-colonial literature arose as a major tool for inciting revolutions and affecting thinking about colonialism. Reaching its height in the mid-20th century, and when it first began to come about, with writers on the frontier such as Edward Said, the author of Orientalism, whose study of Orientalism was very influential in the post-colonial movement, post-colonial literature expressed many themes of discontent and confusion, which further pushed for evolution. While post-colonial literature is broad and rich in themes, we found a few we find to be the most important, influential, and recurring. First off is the idea of questioning one's identity. In being colonized, a lot of culture was lost, and a new culture was forced upon the native peoples. They were left with questions and wrote about things dealing with questions such as, who do I identify with? Second is the struggle for freedom and the reinsertion of the indigenous identity. Hand in hand with the last theme, post-colonial literature often urges for and depicts struggles for freedom from colonial powers and the reemergence and dominance of the indigenous culture. Lastly, there is a strong theme dealing with languages. Language is a barrier, and it is also a tool, especially in colonialism. Indigenous peoples had to learn a new language and left the old behind. Post-colonial literature writers had to deal with the trouble of deciding upon which language to write in and their feelings on it. Furthermore, colonizers would use specific vocabulary, as well as we will later see with Frantz Fanon's writings, to dehumanize the colonized. While there are many authors that exemplify the first theme of questioning one's identity, no author does it more so than Frantz Fanon, the Black French author of Black Skin, White Masks and The Wretched of the Earth. Fanon, as a French psychologist, saw firsthand in the mid-1900s this psychological damage done to blacks in the midst of revolution and racism. Early in his writing, and something he explores, is the idea that he considered himself a Frenchman and identified himself as French. But upon seeing the psychological damage done to blacks colonized by the French, he began to question his identity of a Frenchman versus a black man. Fanon quickly became a critic of colonial powers and a voice for violent revolution. Evident in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, written in 1961, where Fanon analyzes the dehumanizing effects of colonialism, he also focuses on a theme of language, or the use of specific vocabulary, such as colonizer and colonized, to dehumanize the colonized and create deeper rifts between peoples. In the book, Fanon begins to identify with the colonized and urges them to seek help from the lumpen proletariat, or the lowest people in society, such as the peasants or the criminals, and etc. He said they should use these people to forcefully rid themselves of the colonial powers. In Fanon's writings, he questions his identity, spends much effort on explaining the power of language and vocabulary in psychologically degrading peoples, and is a strong voice for anti-colonialism and violent revolution.
For our next author, we have Chinua Achebe. He underscores the themes of struggle for freedom and languages in his works. Achebe was raised in Igbo land, Nigeria. His parents were Christian, but he was fascinated by the Igbo faith. He spoke Igbo, but he had to learn English for colonial school. In school, Achebe was exposed to several Western writers, including Shakespeare and Swift. He was also exposed to Joyce Carey's novel, Mr. Johnson, a story about a young Nigerian who falls afoul with the British authorities. This novel was praised by the West, but Achebe viewed it as portraying blacks as inhuman. He felt that Western literature held Africa in captivity. Because of this, he tries to revive African literature through his 1958 novel, Things Fall Apart. Although facing challenges from the African Writer Conference, Achebe chose to write his novel in English. He intended to repaint an image of Africa for the West. Moreover, he uses several Igbo words throughout his novel, highlighting the complexity of his native language. He sets the story in a fictional Igbo village, highlighting the tradition of the villagers. When the missionaries arrive in the village, many of the outcasts are drawn to Christianity, yet the well-known Akunko resist the social change from the colonizers for fear of losing societal status. Many villagers are excited about the new change, but fear they will lose their tradition. Achebe portrays the struggle of change through Okonko's resistance and suicide. Achebe continues underscoring the theme of struggle with the societal change in his sequel novel, No Longer at Ease. Our final author is Jean Rhys. Jean Rhys explored the theme of racial identity in colonial and post-colonial life. She was born in 1890 on the island of Dominica. Her father was a Welsh doctor and her mother was a third-generation Creole. Rhys associates her mothers with the civilizing mission of the English during the Victorian period. At age 16, Rhys went to study in London and was made fun of for her accent. Her 1966 novella, White Sargasso Sea, is a post-colonial revision of Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre, giving voice to the Creole woman who was locked in an attic in the novel. Rhys questions the practice of colonialism through the character Antoinette's perspective. Antoinette struggles with her identity in a colonized world as she neither belongs to the black majority and the white minority in the novella. Rhys plays with the alienation of the other as Antoinette is the other on two fronts. Rhys, in her life and in her novella, deals with the theme and the question of who do I identify with? While freedom fighters were fighting to break free from colonial rule, post-colonial writers were repainting their image of their people by highlighting their native language, while writing in a way to increase Western attention. They also were choosing an identity for themselves, and these writers were breaking free from Western influence on their literature. Thank you for listening. This has been John Whelan and Mark Poisler.